In today's stories, we follow three men whose routines brought them into contact with animals that operate by entirely different rules. From a Florida pond where a familiar shortcut became a fatal one, to a Philippine river where a tangled net cost a fisherman everything. But first, we start in Pinellas Park, where a man who had done the same thing dozens of times before finally ran out of luck. It was May 14th, 2016. The disc golf course at Heron Pond in Pinellas Park, Florida, had been closed since sunset. The water sat flat and black, its surface broken only occasionally by the slow rings of a feeding fish. The bottom dropped sharply beyond the first few feet of shore, descending into channels 12 to 18 feet down. Beneath the surface, visibility was zero. Dennis Carver was 51 years old with no fixed address in Pinellas County and no steady employment. What he had was a routine: wading into Heron Pond during off hours to retrieve disc golf discs lost by players during the day and reselling them near the course entrance for $5 to $8 each. On a productive night, he could pull 24 discs from the shallows. It was not a living, but it covered the small debts that kept his arrangements with acquaintances from collapsing entirely. He had no vehicle, no consistent income outside the pond. He had been doing it long enough to know which sections held the most discs, which parts of the bank gave quiet entry, and what time of morning left him the longest window before the park filled. He had seen the warning signs posted at multiple points along the shoreline. He had been confronted by a parks employee months earlier after being found near the water after hours and told plainly not to return. Neither warning had changed his behavior. He had done this many times without incident, and the repetition of safety had become, over time, a kind of evidence, not proof that the pond was without risk, but proof that he had been in it and come out fine. But at 4 o'clock in the morning, with the pond quiet and the discs waiting on the bottom, the distinction was easy to set aside. He had the same information he always had. It had always been enough. He had no reason to expect that tonight would be different from any other night he had stood at that bank. Heron Pond, like many freshwater bodies in central Florida, supported a stable population of American alligators. Adult males in the region commonly reach 11 to 13 feet and weigh between 400 and 500 pounds. They are ambush predators, built to hold position in shallow water near the shoreline, motionless for extended periods, until prey enters their range. The attack carries no visible warning, no surface movement, no sound, no approach that registers before contact. The jaws close in fractions of a second with a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. When prey cannot be swallowed whole, the animal executes a death roll, rotating rapidly along its longitudinal axis while maintaining its grip, generating torque sufficient to cause catastrophic tissue damage and severe blood loss within seconds. The animal does not release. It is not a behavior that can be interrupted by struggling or noise or pain. The grip is held until the animal chooses to release, and that choice is made on the animal's terms. In late spring, as water temperatures rise and mating season peaks, territorial aggression intensifies significantly. Males that have held the same shoreline for years become more likely to treat anything that enters the water as a threat and to move on it more aggressively than they would at other times of year. They hold shallower positions at night. They close on disturbances more readily. A person wading chest deep in an unfamiliar section of a central Florida pond at 4 a.m. in May is not simply in a body of water that contains alligators. They are in a body of water that is operating at peak predatory conditions, in the dark, alone. He entered the water sometime before 4 a.m. from the low section of bank where the vegetation had thinned. He moved slowly through the shallows, sweeping his arms in wide arcs beneath the surface, searching by feel for the hard plastic edges of submerged discs. The water was dark enough that he could not see his hands. He found discs and threw them toward the bank. He pressed further out. The search drew him into chest-deep water, into sections of the pond he had not worked before, where the bottom was uneven and dropped away unexpectedly underfoot, and the distance back to shore was longer than he was used to. He was focused entirely on the task. The pond was simply dark and still, and he was in the middle of it, chest deep, far from the bank, with his hands below the surface and his attention on the bottom. The alligator had been in that water before he entered it. It had registered his presence from the first moment he broke the surface and tracked him as he worked his way outward. It had not moved toward him. It had held its position and waited while the distance between them closed on its own. The alligator had been holding position somewhere in that section of the pond before he entered. It had registered his presence from the moment he broke the surface and had tracked his movement as he worked his way outward. It had not rushed. Alligators do not rush. They wait until the distance is right, and then they move. Not gradually, not with warning, but from stillness to full force in a single instant, with no intermediate state between the two. The alligator struck without warning. There was no ripple, no sound, no displacement of water that preceded the attack by enough time to register. The jaws closed around his upper left thigh with a force that was immediate and total. The teeth driving through fabric and muscle in a single compression that left no interval between contact and damage. The animal rolled immediately, rotating rapidly along its body axis while keeping the grip locked, driving him beneath the surface before he had processed what was happening. He surfaced once, arms going out instinctively. There was nothing to grab. The water was open in every direction. He went under again. The injury to the femoral region was catastrophic from the first moment of contact. The femoral artery and vein running through the upper leg sustained the kind of damage in a large alligator bite that the body cannot compensate for. Blood loss was rapid and severe, spreading through the dark water in a cloud the pond did not announce. The animal rolled again. The rotation wrenched his body with a force that disoriented completely. No sense of which direction the surface was, no ability to swim toward it, even when his arms were free. His head broke the surface. He gasped. The grip on his leg did not change. The animal held. It continued to roll. Each rotation pulled him further from the bank, further from the shallows, further from any position where he could put his feet on the bottom and push toward shore. The distance to the bank, already substantial when the attack began, was now academic. At some point, the animal released. The shallowing water near the bank limits a large alligator's ability to maintain the rolling motion. The animal needs depth to complete the rotation, and the release likely came as the struggle moved into water too shallow to continue. It is also possible the release came because the struggle had already reached its conclusion, and the animal had what it needed. He made it to the bank. The drag marks on the grass showed that much, a continuous smear of blood through the turf from the waterline to where his body came to rest, roughly 12 feet from the water's edge. The track curved slightly, the kind of path a person makes when pulling themselves forward on their arms with one leg destroyed and the other barely functional. He had gotten out of the water, that much was certain. How long he remained conscious after reaching the bank is not known. The course was empty. The nearest road carried no traffic at that hour. There were no houses within earshot. No one heard anything. He lost consciousness from blood loss before dawn, 12 feet from the water that had taken everything he could not replace. A jogger passing the eastern edge of the course at approximately 7:10 a.m. noticed a wide, dark stain at the waterline and followed it through the grass to where the body lay. He called emergency services immediately. Dennis Carver was pronounced dead at the scene, his identity confirmed later that afternoon through fingerprints. The discs he had already retrieved were stacked near the tree line, 11 of them, in a rough pile where he had been throwing them as he worked his way outward across the pond. Enough for a few days of sales. He had almost made it through another night. Wildlife trappers that morning removed one large male from the pond, 11 feet, 4 inches, 420 pounds, and a female measuring just under 9 feet the following day. Both were euthanized. A wildlife officer on scene noted at least 4 additional animals visible from the bank that morning. New signage and fencing were installed along the eastern bank within the month. The course reopened within the week. The pond remained. The alligators still in it were not removed. In the Philippines, a man's decision to wade into a river to retrieve a tangled fishing net would trigger an ambush that ended with no chance of escape and no time to call for help. It was May 2014. Recent rainfall had swollen the rivers across Mindanao's remote interior, pushing water into channels and banks that were dry or shallow most of the year. The river Antonio Vargas fished moved slowly despite the increased volume, its surface dark with suspended sediment. Underwater visibility was near zero. Antonio Vargas was 39 years old and had fished the same stretch of river for over a decade, setting nets in the evening and checking them at dawn. The net tangled overnight in a cluster of submerged branches had to be dealt with. Replacing it would cost more than a week's earnings. He had retrieved tangled nets before. He knew how to work quickly, how to free mesh without tearing it, how to minimize the time he spent in the water. He had a system. He had used it at this spot, at this hour, more times than he could count. The river was as familiar to him as the path to his own door. That familiarity was not the same thing as safety, and the difference between the two is not always visible until it is too late to act on it. He had seen crocodiles in the area. Everyone in the village had, but the sightings had always been at a distance. An animal crossing upstream, a shape disappearing from a sandbar at dusk. Never close. Never during his morning rounds. Never when he was in the water. The absence of close encounters had become, in his mind, something close to a pattern of safety. It was not. The absence of an event is not evidence that the event cannot occur. It is only evidence that it has not occurred yet. Saltwater crocodiles are among the largest living reptiles, with mature males reaching 17 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds. They are opportunistic apex predators equipped with sensory systems specifically adapted for ambush in low-visibility water. Rows of dome-shaped pressure receptors along the jaw and body, integumentary sense organs, detect minute vibrations and pressure changes in the water with enough sensitivity to track the position of prey without visual input. A person wading into a river where a saltwater crocodile holds position is being tracked from the moment their foot breaks the surface. The animal does not need to see them. It does not need to hear them. It only needs to hold its position and wait until the prey moves within range. The strike, when it comes, is one of the fastest movements in the animal kingdom. Explosive acceleration from complete stillness that covers the intervening distance before the prey has time to register that something is wrong. During periods of high water, crocodiles relocate into flooded channels and sections of river where they are not typically found. The recent rainfall had done exactly that, pushing animals upstream into sections Antonio had worked without incident for years. The surface gave no indication of this. The river looked the same as it always did at that hour. Antonio waded in. The water rose from his ankles to his knees to mid-thigh as the bottom dropped away. The mud was soft and the footing uncertain, each step requiring a moment to find solid ground before shifting weight forward. He reached the tangle and began working the net free, one loop at a time, carefully to avoid tearing the mesh. He had been in the water for several minutes before he made significant progress. The work required both hands and most of his attention. His body bent slightly forward, his weight shifted toward the branches, positioned in a way that made fast movement in any direction difficult. He was not thinking about crocodiles. He was thinking about the net, about the sequence of loops and how to free them without pulling the whole thing tighter, about the cost of replacing it if he tore it, about getting back to the bank with the net intact and the day's work recoverable. The river was doing what it always did around him, moving slowly, carrying sediment, giving nothing away about what it held. The crocodile had been holding position along the riverbed since before dawn, motionless in less than 4 feet of water, its coloration indistinguishable from the sediment dark bottom. It had been there before Antonio reached the bank. It tracked his entry and every movement through pressure changes in the water without shifting its own position. No ripple, no sound, nothing on the surface to indicate its presence. When Antonio took a half step deeper to reach the remaining section of tangled net, the distance closed to within strike range. The crocodile went from complete stillness to full acceleration in the same instant. The attack covered the gap in under 2 seconds. No surface disturbance, no sound, no warning of any kind. The jaws closed around his upper thigh and hip with force that was immediate and catastrophic, the bite compressing and tearing the major vascular structures of the proximal leg on first contact. The impact knocked him sideways. He screamed, briefly, sharply, before the animal reversed direction and dragged him away from the bank into deeper water. His hands reached for the branches he had been working. They were already gone. His feet left the bottom. The surface closed over him. The crocodile initiated a death roll, spinning along its body axis with Antonio locked in its grip. The rotation tore through ligaments and muscle and destroyed any sense of orientation. No up, no down, no direction toward air. He surfaced once, arms reaching upward, and was pulled under again before he could draw a full breath. The effort of resisting the roll burned through what oxygen remained in his lungs faster than struggling alone would have. Blood spread through the water in a dark, rapid cloud that neither of them could see, but that the water carried downstream regardless. The vascular damage was producing blood loss at a rate his body had no means of compensating for. Oxygen deprivation and hemorrhage progressed together, each accelerating the other. His movements weakened, became uncoordinated, then stopped entirely. He lost consciousness within minutes of the first contact. The river continued moving slowly around him, its surface smooth and unbroken, as though nothing had occurred beneath it. The net was still tangled in the branches. The branches were still in the water. Nothing at the surface marked what had happened below it. His absence was noted when he failed to return by mid-morning. Family members found his sandals, his basket tipped on its side at the mud's edge, and the partially retrieved net still tangled in the branches exactly as he had left it. A search team arrived by boat that afternoon and located his body approximately 200 feet downstream, submerged near a tangle of roots and water, deep enough that it required the boat to find him. The medical examiner listed drowning and blood loss as joint causes of death. A large male, 14 feet, 2 inches, was taken on a baited line 2 days later near where the body had been recovered and euthanized. Whether it was the animal responsible could not be confirmed, but its size and location were consistent. It was the largest animal anyone in the village recalled being pulled from that stretch of river. Community leaders issued recommendations that nets be checked from shore using long poles, and that no one enter the water alone during or after high water. A small marker was placed at the bank near where Antonio's basket had been found. It remained there for years, weathering slowly. Yet even those who thought they were making quick, calculated decisions weren't safe. In northern Australia, a young man's choice to cross a flooded road on foot at night would end in a violent ambush with no witnesses, no warning, and no chance of survival. It was September 13th, 2018. Seasonal flooding had covered a section of remote road in northern Australia, turning a route Caleb Morris had driven many times into something he had never encountered before. The water appeared calm and shallow from the road's edge, reflecting the beam of his headlights without revealing anything beneath. No other vehicles, no other people. The detour would add over an hour. Caleb Morris was 24 years old and had grown up in the region. He knew this road in dry conditions. He did not fully know what it was in the dark under a foot of floodwater. He stepped out of the vehicle, left the headlights on, and waded in to check the depth before deciding whether to drive through. It was a practical decision, made quickly, the kind made on empty roads at night when the alternative feels disproportionate to the apparent obstacle. He had driven that road before. Flooded roadways in northern Australia's wet season are among the highest risk environments for saltwater crocodile encounters. The animals patrol floodplains actively during wet season, using temporary waterways to access new territory and concentrate near predictable crossing points, locations where prey is channeled into the water by the terrain. They return to the same crossings across multiple seasons. A particular animal may use the same flooded low point on a particular road every wet season for years. They are primarily nocturnal, more active after dark, and their pressure-sensing systems operate effectively in conditions where human visibility is near zero. The darkness that prevents a person from seeing anything below the surface has no equivalent effect on an animal that does not hunt by sight. The water that looks calm and passable from the road's edge is the same water the crocodile has been motionless in since before the flooding began, positioned, waiting, tracking anything that enters. A person wading across that water at night is not crossing a flooded road. They are walking into an ambush that was set before they arrived. Caleb waded in. The bottom was firm, packed dirt, which gave him confidence. The water rose to mid-calf, then his knees as he moved toward the center. He swept his phone light across the surface. It reflected nothing useful back, just the flat glare of light off dark water, the same in every direction. He could not see the bottom. He could not see more than a few inches beneath the surface. What he could see looked like nothing. The crossing appeared manageable. He took another step forward and then another. The water was at mid-thigh now. The far bank was visible in the headlights. The road surface on the other side was dry. He was roughly halfway across. The crocodile had been positioned approximately 25 feet to his right, submerged in less than 3 feet of water. It had moved into the flooded area earlier that evening following rising water from a nearby creek and had been motionless long enough that the water around it had returned to complete stillness. No ripple, no disturbance, no indication on the surface that something measuring over 12 feet was lying between him and the far bank. It registered Caleb's entry the moment his foot broke the surface and tracked him continuously as he waded forward. The phone light swept across the water and illuminated nothing recognizable. The crocodile did not move until the distance closed to within strike range. At that point, it did not hesitate. The attack came from behind. The crocodile covered the gap in under 3 seconds. No sound, no surface movement, no warning of any kind. The jaws closed around his midsection from behind, compressing his torso and penetrating deep into the back and abdomen. The thoracic cavity sustained immediate structural damage, ribs fractured under the initial compression, the tissue beneath driven inward. The bite force of a large saltwater crocodile exceeds 2,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone on first contact. The force of the impact launched him forward off his feet. His phone spun out of his hand, its light briefly visible before hitting the water and going dark. The pressure on his torso prevented his lungs from fully expanding. He could not draw a full breath. Whatever sound he managed, a gasp, a partial cry, was cut off before it carried. There was nothing on the road behind him. No one to hear it. The water was dark and the headlights illuminated the surface and nothing beneath it. The crocodile pulled him backward and down. He went under immediately. He surfaced once, his arms reaching upward with nothing to find. No bank, no bottom, no shallow ground within reach, and went under again as the animal moved toward deeper water at the roadway's edge. The animal initiated a death roll, spinning rapidly along its axis and rotating his body with it. The thoracic injuries compounded under the mechanical force of the rotation, Water entered his airway. His lungs, already unable to expand fully, began taking in fluid. The blood loss from the bite combined with the oxygen deprivation to accelerate the collapse faster than either would have alone. His arms stopped reaching. His body stopped resisting. Within 2 minutes, he lost consciousness. Within 3 to 4, he was gone. The water above him returned to stillness. The headlights from his vehicle, still burning at the road's edge 130 feet away, illuminated the surface of the crossing without revealing anything beneath it. There was nothing on the surface to see. There never had been. When he failed to arrive, family contacted authorities. Rangers found the vehicle at first light. Headlights on, engine running, door open, exactly as he had left it. The footprints in the packed dirt at the road's edge led into the water and did not come back. His body was located 260 feet from the road, submerged in 4 feet of water. 8 hours after the attack. The injuries were consistent with a large saltwater crocodile and evidence of a death roll. Drowning was listed as the primary cause of death, with thoracic trauma as a contributing factor. A crocodile measuring 12 feet, 9 inches, was captured 300 feet from the site 3 days later and euthanized. The road crossing was reclassified as a high-risk wet season site and posted with explicit crocodile warnings at both ends. The only thing the scene could not account for was that interval, 30 seconds at most, between when he stepped off the road's edge and when the water closed over him. And that interval, like the animal responsible for it, was never recovered. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now